Hi, everyone. Welcome to TribNet 2025. My name is Julie Irvin. I'm the Training and Development Manager here at Tribute. And today I would like to bring you an executive level topic. This one is focused on operations. And we wanted to go over some metrics and scorecards for operations and how you can get that information from TrueLinks. So there are various ways to track your operational success, and some of you have your own kind of sophisticated spreadsheet or list of specific reports that you run to get a handle on your operations. What I'm here to show you is that many of the metrics that you need are easily accessible in TrueLinks or with an Excel query. Any of the reports that I talk about today that are not already a standard report in TrueLinks can be found on our self-service center in the resource section under the category Operations Scorecard Reports. And here's the link to our self-service center. A copy of this PDF will also be attached in Eventify. So if you don't immediately get this link, it will be on the PDF. Someone in your organization has a login to our self-service center and they have permissions to add other users' permissions to the self-service center. If you're not sure, contact support and we can create a login for you. Here are some of the key measures we're going to cover today. I'm sure you'll notice some metrics I don't have here because everybody's metrics vary slightly. But hopefully this will give you a strong start to your own scorecard or give you additional measures to add to it. So let's start big picture with gauging company revenue and company gross margin percentage. First, some clarity on revenue versus sales. As most of you know, revenue numbers are not the same as sales numbers. Revenue is the total income that we get, including income from sales, liquidated assets, investments, and other non-operating activities. And then sales is the income we get from selling goods and services to customers. So revenue is typically going to be larger than sales because it includes income from other sources. So you can find your company revenue on your income statement. If you haven't already, you can design or have us design your income statement in TrueLinks Report Designer. But most of you probably already have this set up and are using it. And then you can use Business Activity Sales Display, which also has a corresponding report to match it, to get gross margin percentage for all locations or by a specific location using the year-to-date or 12-month sales frames. Let me hone in on that so you can see that we have recent sales, month-to-date sales, but you probably want to focus on the year-to-date or 12-month sales. In my example, you see that the margin percentage that I have highlighted is standard and dropship orders or invoices. Standard invoices include special orders, stock sales, and then drop ships are just drop ship orders. If you do agent orders, you may want to use the total gross margin percentage further down in the grand total because we add agent orders into that total. To see the cost attributable to goods sold, look at your income statement again. The accuracy of this number is going to be heavily dependent on the accuracy of your general ledger mappings, and then picking the correct account or accounts in the design of your income statement. So talk to us if you would like us to review all of your GL mappings for accuracy. An easy way to check on your own to see if the right transactions are posting to cost of goods sold, you're going to use the GL transaction history inquiry. You can enter a date range and then you'll enter your cost of goods sold account in the selection criteria. And then you're going to focus on the type column, which is right here. There should be nothing with a type other than COGS or rebate cost of goods sold listed there. So the codes for that will be COGS or REB COGS. If you see something other than that, that's an indication of a bad mapping. Another metric you might use is payroll dollars as a percent of revenue. I've put the formula to calculate that in orange, but most of you probably already know how to calculate that. The numbers needed to get that percentage are likely found on your income statement. If not, we can design one for you. Some key points to remember: that this calculation is going to help your business understand how much of your revenue is spent on employee compensation. The ideal percentage varies depending on your industry and your company size. The accuracy of this number will also be dependent on the manual journal entries being made for payroll, insurance, etc. in TrueLinks. Specifically, if all the relevant accounts are being selected in that manual journal entry. Moving on to sales, there are a couple ways that we can track some sales metrics. For individual CSRs, they can use our role-based dashboard, which is our CSR dashboard. And it's going to show them things like quote conversion rate, quote age, and then it also will list your quote detail at the bottom. And you can drill down into those individual quotes by clicking on the hyperlink. And then you have the ability to export that information into Excel. What you're probably going to be interested in is something at the company level. So we have a report or query that's out on our self-service center, and it's called CSR Performance. And you see it shows things like quote dollars, quote volume, order volume, and does the same thing for orders and then invoices. And it'll show you gross margin information. You can also use the data that comes with the output of this query to calculate your own values. For instance, I have calculated a quote conversion percentage rate using these values that are on the report already. So you can do the same if you want to calculate the quote conversion rate using this query. The new customer count and return dollars are also important metrics sometimes. So we have a query called the new customer list, and it's going to list the new customers added to TrueLinks for a given date range. So it'll show you the ones that have been added, but then just by virtue of reviewing the number of rows in the output, you'll be able to see how many customers were added in that date range. And then we have a query called return dollars by date range. So you'll enter a date range in the selection criteria, and it will return invoice numbers. Specifically, this is invoice corrections where a quantity was returned for credit. It'll show you the quantity that was returned and the cost that was associated with that return. And then you can total that up in the spreadsheet. What about tracking on-time percentages? We have a report in TrueLinks called the Customer Service Level Report, and it helps you determine how closely you're meeting your customer's shipping specifications. The report is going to list the dollars and lines that were shipped on time or shipped late. Late shipments are broken down further according to user-defined date ranges that you can see in the selection criteria here. You can also track complete or partial shipments. So it's important to track this information in your role for a number of reasons, right? So it's going to affect customer satisfaction, operational efficiency, performance metrics for the whole operations team, cost management, and give you an idea of how much of a competitive advantage that you have. How much are you consistently meeting delivery deadlines? So you see, I have a lot of criteria that I can enter to select on this report, and I can base it on promised date or required date, and I can choose an invoice date range and a location. The report is going to group by SPC or some variation of the SPC. And then you can choose to include invoice detail for all invoices or only show exception invoices. And then you have the option to show actual dollars or a percentage to reflect the on-time deliveries. And then this is what the output is going to look like. This is showing you the SPC. So it sorts it by SPC and it breaks down the orders underneath that SPC. And then you see that it shows you an on-time column with a percentage, because I chose percentage in my criteria. And then I've chosen to track things that are 1 to 5 days late, 6 to 29 days late, 30 to 59 days late, etc. And it'll show me the percentage that falls under those criteria. What you might be more interested in is the grand totals that show at the end of the report. That gives you an overall picture of your delivery dates and your on-time percentages for the whole company rather than a specific SPC. We also have a way to track lost sales. So tracking reasons for lost sales is vital for an industrial distributor for several reasons. So you'll be able to identify trends by understanding why sales are lost. You can improve your products and services by getting that feedback about lost sales, and that can highlight areas where your products and services may be lacking. It can enhance sales strategies. So knowing why sales are lost allows the sales team to refine their strategies and become more efficient. It helps you to retain customers, and it gives you a good competitive analysis. Lastly, it can help with resource allocation. So knowing where and why sales are lost, you can allocate resources more efficiently and focus on high potential areas and avoid wasting efforts on less promising opportunities. So we have a specific query that shows you this information, but there's a bit of setup required to use it. The first step that you're going to take is to set up what we call a user-defined field definition. You will set up a user field ID called not con. So not converted is what that stands for. These would be quotes that were not converted to sales orders. It needs to specifically be that user ID in order for the query to be able to track the lost sales. In the caption, you can just call it reason for lost sales or some variation of that. Choose a field type of SO line because that's where the field's going to appear, quote lines and SO lines. And then the data type is going to be a list of values, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And then you have an option to make this user review required, meaning when a user enters the quote, it's going to make them go look at that, not necessarily enter anything for it, but it makes them go look at it before they're allowed to exit the quote. So this will raise the likelihood that people interact with this field and you're able to track your sales more accurately or your lost sales more accurately. So we're in tab 1, the general tab. Then you'll move to tab 2, which is the documents tab. And this is the documents where you want that field to appear. In our case, we want it only to appear on the quote line. Then we're going to move to tab 3, which is the list codes. In the general tab, we said that we wanted the field type to be a list of values. And so when we get to the list codes, I'm going to create all of the reason codes that might be the reason for losing a sale. So here's a handful that I've created, and those are what are going to appear on the quote line under tab 10, user fields. So I click the drop down and I can just click the reason for the lost sale and save that. And then I'm going to download the query called lost sales unconverted quote lines from the self-service center. And I'm going to run it from a specific quote date to the present time. And you see that it returns the quotes and the information and why the sale was lost on that particular quote. How about tracking the success of new product lines? We have a couple of reports that you could use, but the one that would probably be most useful is called the sales by sales rep or location or customer or SPC report. This is referred to affectionately as the or report. And you see that you've got a lot of criteria to enter and how you want to group the information on the report. For our purposes, I chose to group by SPC since we want to track the success of new product lines. And I'm assuming that your new product lines are created under a specific sales product category. So I'm going to group and display that by SPC, and then I'm going to sort in descending sales dollar order. And this is what the output is going to look like. You're going to be able to see from the top down what my most successful, most profitable SPC's product lines are in my system. And it gives you a total for this year, and then it gives you, if there are data available, it will give you totals from last year. And then there is a way to group SPCs together in what are called product families. So I can also run this report by product family. Let me go down to the bottom here, and you can see what it looks like when I choose to group by product family. It will group those product families together and show me the sales dollars. So I had two families that I created for series fittings and pipe fittings. And then you see that if there are SPCs that aren't in a family, it will show up under none. So if you want to see it by specific SPC, you can use the first grouping of SPC. If you want to group certain product families together, certain SPCs together, that's called product family. And that's set up in product family maintenance. And then you assign that product family to the SPC in SPC maintenance. Tracking our inventory value and our turns is important to look at from an operational perspective. In business activity inventory display, you'll be able to see that value across 6 months. So you can see that in the top here, I have, I can track my inventory value across a 6-month time period because we really want to focus on trends rather than specific month values. You also have the value change at a percentage form right below that. And then turns are also important. So we track that on a month-to-month basis across a 6-month span. And then we also track them across 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. 12 months is probably the one you want to focus on. And you always want to focus on the non-Z items, meaning non-Z class items, because Z class items are items that we don't typically stock. And because we only order them when we need them, they always naturally have high turnover. So we want to focus on the non-Z class items. If you belong to a trade association, they usually release a report every year that will help you with understanding what your benchmarks should be in terms of turns and other areas of business. So depending on your industry, your recommended benchmarks for success will vary, but generally a good rule for turns is somewhere between 4 and 6. Tracking stockouts is crucial for operations in a distribution business for several reasons. Stockouts can lead to missed sales opportunities and unhappy customers. So when we track stockouts, you can identify patterns and take proactive measures to ensure products are available when customers need them. Understanding which items are frequently out of stock is going to help in optimizing inventory levels. This is going to ensure that the right amount of stock is maintained, reducing both excess inventory and shortages. Tracking stockouts can highlight efficiencies in the supply chain. It's going to help managers identify bottlenecks or delays in the supply chain and work on improving lead times and supplier reliability. It's important for financial performance. It's important for demand forecasting and also for maintaining a high level of competitive advantage. So we have a report on the self-service center called the Stockout Report, and you see that it shows the SPC, the item in the description, the item class. It's going to give you some stats like the on hand, the quantity on order with the vendor, the quantities that are work orders and customer sales orders. And then it's going to show you a shortage, so the negative on hand that you have. When you download this report, there's going to be a tab at the bottom called SQL for Report. And you're going to want to go to that tab and look at the box highlighted in yellow, because it's going to tell you everything that is used to tabulate that short quantity on the output. So for instance, it may or may not include stock transfers. It may or may not include drop ships. So you'll want to make sure you look at that so you understand what that number is showing you. I think we all know the importance of cycle counting and the advantages it provides. The issue is always whether we can carve out time to do them and be consistent about it. Let's highlight the importance of them again, just to remind ourselves, and then talk about how to track cycle counts. Tracking the completed cycle counts is important in your area for inventory accuracy, obviously. Regular cycle counts can help ensure that the inventory records match the actual stock on hand. And that accuracy is crucial for making informed decisions about purchasing, sales, and inventory management. Loss prevention is also something that we can track and fix quickly. By frequently counting the inventory, we can quickly identify the discrepancies that may indicate theft, damage, or other issues, and it helps in taking timely corrective actions to prevent further losses. The accurate inventory data also allows for smoother operations because it reduces the time spent searching for items, it minimizes order picking errors, and ensures that the right products are available for customers. And then maintaining those accurate inventory levels helps in avoiding overstocking or understocking, both of which are costly. So just to go over the setup, if you're interested in starting cycle counting, or you need to be reminded of how it's set up in order to use it, you first have to go to Location Master Maintenance and tell the system how frequently you want to count items in each class. So we have A, B, and C class frequency. If you also want to count Z class items, there's a system parameter that controls that. And then you're going to tell the system how many items that you would prefer to count in each cycle count. So it's called max items to count, and it will bring up to that quantity up every time you do a cycle count. That's something that's very misunderstood a lot about the max items to count, is that users often expect it to bring up the exact quantity that I've put here in Location Master Maintenance. What it means is that it will bring up to that number of items up to count, depending on the last time it was counted and the frequency of with which the items need to be counted. So just keep that in mind. If I want to increase or decrease the frequency of counts for a specific SPC and location, I can do that in SPC Location Maintenance. And these will override the values in Location Master Maintenance, at least for this specific SPC and location. Same thing with the item location level. If there are items I want to count less or more frequently, I can enter that in Item Location Maintenance, and that will override the SPC and location settings. Notice here in Item Location Maintenance, there's a last cycle count date. So every time I do a cycle count on a series of items and I post those counts, the system will update that last count date in Item Location Maintenance with that date. That's going to be important here when I show you the next report. So we have a couple of tools that are available for tracking cycle counting and kind of improving your cycle counting. So the first tool that I have is a query called cycle counting total number of items in each class. This is going to be used with another query that's available on the Self-Service Center, but I'll show you that in a moment. What this is going to do is total up the number of items in each item class in your system. Then you're going to download a query called cycle count max items to count, and you're going to plug the numbers from the first query into the number of items column on the second query. And what the system will do is take that information and give you a recommended max items to count value to put in location master maintenance. The purpose of this value is going to ensure that you're touching every single item inside of a 1-year period. The next tool that I have is going to be able to be used in a variety of ways. At its base, this query is going to show you the last count date by date range. So I'm going to put in a date range and a location, and it's going to show me all the items that were counted in that date range and location, and on what date. So I can use this information to do a few things. I can visually tabulate the number of cycle counts, because sometimes we like to track the number of cycle counts by looking at the different dates within the chosen date range. So you see in the little bit of this display that I'm showing here, I have 2 different cycle count dates. I have December 2nd and December 3rd. So immediately I can see there's at least two cycle counts that were done within this date range. You may even use Excel commands to tally up any of your desired numbers. So maybe I want to tally up the number of items that were counted on December 2nd, as I've done here in my query. So you can use the output to tally up a lot of different things that you may want to see as far as cycle counting. We have a few tools available to track employee productivity. Firstly, we have a query called labor activity inquiry, and it simply shows the labor used on a work order, the total number of minutes or hours that were applied, along with the labor costs. Notice that I'm using the employee view, meaning it's sorting the information by employee. If you purchase the production management module, it has a production management inquiry that shows you efficiency by work instruction and employee. Work instructions are a set of tasks that have to be performed to complete a build, like assembly, painting, or inspection. You can enter an estimate of the time it should take to complete each of those tasks when you set them up, and then your employees are actually going to record the actual time it takes to perform the tasks, which then allows TrueLinks to evaluate efficiency. This inquiry not only is going to help you identify specific task inefficiency, but also employee inefficiencies. So here you can see I've drilled down into the data, and I am able to sort that data by employee ID. So here you can see my employee ID. And by the way, your employees have to be set up in a program called employee maintenance in order to be able to track this. So your employee is going to track that information. So the minutes estimated comes from the work instruction setup that you did. So those tasks that you set up. And then the minutes elapsed is the actual amount that was taken to complete that task. And those two numbers are going to allow TrueLinks to calculate an efficiency number. If the efficiency number is in red, it means there was an inefficiency. If it's in yellow, that means that no quantity was entered when they recorded their activity in the system. And of course, if it's green, that means there was an efficient use of that time. Now let's talk about cost savings. Cutting costs and reducing them is a big part of operations. Specifically, what we're going to focus on in that regard is efficiency and reducing administrative and support costs. So let's start with automating routine tasks. Most of you know that there are jobs in the system that can be set up to run automatically at a scheduled time. I've listed a few here that are probably going to be more important to you than other jobs in the system for your particular role. So we have a job that will email documents to customers and vendors. So invoices, statements, purchase orders, check remittances, sales order acknowledgements. So we want to make sure that those documents are getting created, but also that they're getting emailed each evening. So there's a job you can set up to mail those all out, or it can be set up to run several times a day to make sure those are getting out in a timely fashion, which means you're going to get paid faster, you're going to get your inventory faster, etc. The other job is the missing data detection job, and that's under the system administration portion of the menu. And that is going to identify, in part, items that were not set up completely. So there's incomplete data. Incomplete item setup can affect a lot of areas of your business. For instance, you're going to get errors when you're entering quotes. You're going to get errors when the buy job runs, and it won't be able to create a purchase order because there's incomplete information to fill out the purchase order. So the missing data detection job is going to identify the items that have incomplete setup. And then in job messages inquiry, it will show you those items and tell you how to fix it. If there's a lot of information, you can highlight and click the rows, and you can copy those and paste them into Excel so that you can work off of an Excel sheet. The GL journal entry data update job ensures that all of the transactions that transpired throughout the day are getting posted to the accounts. That means that they'll get reflected on your financials. The job will also report any errors that are they're usually due to mapping errors, or there's a missing mapping. So you want to check the job messages inquiry to make sure that everything was able to be posted, because if everything's posted correctly, then your numbers on your financials are correct as well. The item status update job is responsible for making sure that different quantity buckets are accurate in the system. For instance, the committed quantity, the released quantity, the on-hand quantity that shows up in inquiries like item overview, or in the quote line looking at item availability. Sometimes those buckets get out of whack with the actual real data on the sales order line, so the job will go through and make sure those buckets are up to date. Those numbers, those total bucket quantities, are used a lot of times for your purchasing agents, your sales guys, for people to make important decisions. So it's important that those numbers are accurate. The update customer credit rating job is going to identify customers that need to be put on temporary restricted credit or removed from temporary restricted credit. So we can make sure that the customers that are on restricted credit are not getting items shipped to them, and we're leaving open invoices that may not get paid or get paid late. The other thing you can do that you may not know is that you can schedule the automated run of all the reports in the system. So all of the reports in the system have an icon that allows you to schedule reports to run automatically each month using the Windows task scheduler. I have a help document attached to this session in Eventify that details how to do this, but here's the gist. You're going to click on this icon on the particular report, the report you want to automate, and you're going to tell it the frequency that you want to run this report and the date to start doing that. And that's going to create a task in Windows Task Scheduler. Specifically, it's going to create a folder in the task scheduler called TrueLinks. And then there's going to be a folder for each user that created a scheduled report. And then underneath that, to the right, you're going to see all of the reports that are scheduled to run. So those will run at the desired frequency on the desired date. If you make sure that the item has a printer selected, it will also print to the correct printer. TrueLinks Air, if you haven't heard about it, is our automated warehouse option. So this is going to utilize a handheld device to perform all warehouse activities like picking, put away, physical inventory, and it'll reduce the time spent going back and forth to a computer to perform those same functions. Now let's talk about minimizing manual errors. To do this, one of the things you can do to minimize that is to use default values wherever possible. That's going to help avoid keying errors and reduce keying time. What I mean by default values is you can tell the system to put a specific value in a specific field every single time you're prompted for that. And that will allow the user to not have to enter that same thing every time they go into the program. A good example is the selling location on a quote. If you only have a CSR, if you have a CSR who only enters orders for selling location 01, you just want to have the system default 01 in the selling location every time they open up a quote, rather than having them enter that every single time they enter a quote. So we have a program called User Default Value Maintenance where you can set these up. And these, what you see on the screen are the CAN values that we already have set up in the system that you can choose to have the system default. So for example, I put a red dot next to the ones that would maybe most useful to your staff. Like let's look at bank account. Every time I do a check run, every time I enter a cash receipt batch, every time I enter a voucher batch, I have to enter an account, a bank account, so it knows what cash account to post to in the general ledger. Some of you have one cash account, so that's not an issue. It's just going to default that every time. Some of you have multiple ones. And to prevent the user from picking the wrong bank account, we may want to have a specific bank account default. So I can set up my user ID, choose the bank account default, which is listed here, and then I can tell it what to put in that default. So if your bank is called First National, then you can put First National as the default value to put in there. You might also notice that there's a couple of reports listed in this list. You can enter a default report ID for a couple of reports in TrueLinks. So if you have particular report parameters that you use regularly or your users do, they can set up a default report ID that will automatically be selected whenever they open that report screen, either directly or from another screen using a Go menu. You can enter default report IDs for purchase order print or the cash receipt register report. Again, this is reducing the keying that we have to do, the manual entry we have to do, the selections we have to do to run, to do certain functions. And it takes a little bit of time, but all of that time adds up to inefficiency the more we have to keep re-entering stuff that is the same every single time. And then there are default values that come from your customer, from your vendor records and your item vendor records, and then just from your item records. So make sure the default values, like the required fields from customer records, vendor records, and item records are correct. So to give you some examples, in the customer record, there are things like payment terms, shipping preferences, taxing defaults, credit rating. Those kinds of things need to be accurate to reduce keying errors, but also to reduce errors further down in the process. So if my taxing defaults are incorrect, that's going to cause more administrative time to do invoice corrections to correct that information. In the item vendor and vendor records, things like the purchase unit of measure, the purchase multiple, the replacement cost, all of those things are going to have adverse effects downstream for the buying agents, for the payables person. So make sure those values that are in those records are correct. The important things in the item maintenance record are things like the selling unit of measure, the SPC that it belongs to, because the SPC controls discounting things, sales analysis, because we run sales report by SPC. We run a lot of things by SPC or group them by SPC. So making sure those default values are correct in those records is going to minimize keying errors and minimize administrative costs further down the line. And then lastly, training is important, right? Product training is an obvious one. Product training on your product lines for your employees allows them to sell the right products to customers and is going to create return business for you. And of course, training on the tool you use to run your business, which in your case is TrueLinks. And being that I'm a training manager, this might sound like a convenient topic, but it also happens to be true. I don't think I'm telling any of you anything you don't already know to some degree, but at the same time, training is the thing that most often gets pushed down the priority list in terms of budget. From personal experience in talking with customers, when they don't know how to use the system that they're required to work in daily, it can damage morale and create a high level of frustration, which can lead to turnover, which is costly for you. It also creates a really bad return on your investment in our software. If they can't use the system properly that was purchased, you're getting little to no return on your investment. One of our internal company values is to help customers be as autonomous as possible and to rely as little as possible on us to do their jobs, not because we don't want to help, but because we know that fostering or creating dependence doesn't create a satisfied customer. That's why we offer things like our self-service center, our video training site, which is called TribNet University, weekly meetings, consulting engagements, and this conference. Because the more that your employees know, the better, and the more access they have to information, the better. So I've listed some things that are going to benefit you if we are increasing our focus on product training and your software training. So well-trained employees are likely to produce high quality products, reduce defects, and ensure customer satisfaction. Proper training helps them to be more efficient. It gives them better adaptability and they're able to evolve. And then it increases employee morale, as I've also mentioned. So let's conclude our time by letting you know a couple things. One is if you need something really custom in terms of reports, we can write one for you. If you need to modify any of the reports that we've shown you here today, we can also do that. That comes at a quoted cost, but we're able to do that for you. Or if you're familiar with the database structure, you can set up an ODBC connection to the TrueLinks database in Excel and create your own reports. So if you're interested in doing that, I've created instructions to do that and attach that to this session in Eventify. Hopefully you got some new tools for getting a handle on your operations, or you got confirmation that you're kind of already on the right track in tracking the metrics that you are. Make sure you check out the other queries that are on our self-service center that are not in the operations management category to see if anything else out there might be helpful to you. Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of the conference.